These pirates picked the wrong flag. 31 speedboats, 250 gunmen, 8 minutes to lose a ship or take it back. When pirates swarmed a harmless American freighter off Somalia, they expected ransom and headlines. What they got was a carrier strike group that doesn't negotiate, only steel, fire, and a rescue executed with stopwatch precision. If you blink, you'll miss how fast a superpower arrives. The ambush. The sun climbed out of the Indian Ocean like a blowtorch, turning the swell into plates of polished metal. A U.S. logistics vessel, slow, salt-stained, and deliberately forgettable, held a steady course through the pirate-hunted waters off Somalia. On paper, it was a cargo ship. In reality, it was a lifeline. High-density jet fuel, encrypted avionics modules, thermal ignition compounds, everything a nearby American carrier needed to keep F-35s in the air and long-range missiles on tap. 10 sailors stood the security watch, not Marines in dress blues, working sailors with carbines, radios, and a small locker of just in case. The captain, a former Navy lieutenant now running logistics, walked the bridge with a coffee he never drank, scanning a horizon that was always the same until the second it wasn't. It wasn't. White wakes stitched the distance. First 3, then 7, then too many to count. The radar scope flowered with fast-moving returns. The lookout's voice cracked on the bridge intercom. Multiple small craft, high speed, bearing starboard bow, 31 skiffs fanned out like a wolf pack, engines screaming, bows knifing at over 50 knots. Each boat carried 8 men and too many weapons. RPGs wrapped in rags, PKM machine guns, battered rifles, and no fear. This wasn't opportunism, it was a playbook. The pirates split into teams. Suppression skiffs slewed broadside and opened up, hammering the bridge wings and exposed catwalks, forcing the Americans into steel and shadow. Boarding teams slid into blind spots amid container stacks, flung grapnels and clawed up the hull. The first RPG burst showered the aft deck with shrapnel. A second punched divots out of a vent tower. The sailors fought from cover, crisp, controlled, counting rounds. 2 skiffs lost gunners in the first exchange, but numbers told. Within minutes, 5 Americans were down, 3 wounded, 2 dead, and the bridge door buckled under a sledge. The captain's coffee bounced once on the deck and shattered. Hands up, zip ties, muzzles pressed into backs. The surviving crew were forced to the deck, wrists cinched with tow ropes, cheekbones in rust and salt. A pirate jammed a boot onto the captain's shoulder and barked orders in a dialect he half recognized. One decision happened before the boot. The captain, sliding a palm over the console in those last seconds of control, tripped a flush-mounted toggle. No alarm, no buzz, just a packet of encrypted 1s and 0s sprinting skyward toward a satellite and down again to the nearest American carrier strike group, less than 200 kilometers away. The pirates whooped. They thought they'd bagged another ransom ship. They hadn't. They'd grabbed the artery that keeps a carrier's heart beating, and the Navy does not let hearts stop. Mission update. If this story matters to you, power it forward. We're pushing to 100,000. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and drop a like. Tell us where you're watching from. Comment your country below. Enjoy the rest of the video. Back to the mission in 3, 2, 1. Thundernet. On the carrier's flag bridge, the operations wall didn't flash. It went red and stayed there. Priority 1. Hostile capture of high-value naval asset. The Air Wing had seen these waters before. They knew the difference between pirates with courage and pirates with a plan. Rear Admiral Peter Sloan stepped to the console, eyes on the tactical overlay, and didn't raise his voice. Initiate Operation Thundernet. Wheels up now. No embassy calls, no careful back and forth with a warlord's cousin. This wasn't a hostage negotiation. This was a rescue and a message. Hangar bays erupted into muscle memory. On the flight deck, 10 MH-60 Seahawks rolled into the sun. Each bird packed with 30 operators, SEALs and Marine Raiders, whose rehearsal blocks were built for ship takedowns and short, savage fights. Down the line, 5 FA-18EF Super Hornets took fuel and slung precise, legal steel, J-dams and gun pods, weaponed for deck suppression, not spectacle. In the drone bay, crews brought 20 MQ-25 Stingrays to life, AI-assisted eyes and claws with microbomb bays. Their encrypted data feeds poured into the carrier's tactical nerve center, a wall of overlapping video, heat signatures and coordinates blooming like constellations. Overhead, an E-2D Hawkeye took station and began knitting the battle space together. A P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft slid onto a broad racetrack, listening to the coastline breathe. Within minutes, 3 layers of response were airborne. Eyes and claws. Stingrays sprinted low to find the stolen ship, tag the escort skiffs, and create a live 3D target mosaic. The hammer. Super Hornets arced wide to own the sky. and turn any deck gun that dared to speak into scrap. The keys, Seahawks skimmed the wavetops in the radar shadow, stacked to hit from multiple bearings and bored in synchronized teams. On the ops wall, icons moved with purpose. The stolen vessel had swung north, making for a notch in the coast. A spiderwork of shacks, fuel bladders, and blast-stained walls that had dodged every someday strike for years. If the pirates made it inside that maze, the fight would shift to alleys and doorways, with hostages under rifles. That was not an option.
Contact.
The first Stingray saw the hijacked ship through heat shimmer and sea spray, its cargo stacks, its scarred paint, and the black bruise of fresh burn marks on the aft deck. 4 skiffs ran escort like arrogant remoras, their engines dumping hot ribbons into the infrared. Targets cross-lidded, fire permissions checked. Micro-munitions walked in like surgeons. 4 precise blossoms tore holes in the sea. 4 skiffs gone. The shockwave came back off the hull in 2 chalky rings and rolled under the bow. Inside a skiff's bow locker, an RPG cooked off and pinwheeled into the surf like a bottle rocket. The Stingrays slid out to the sides and kept watching. 2 Super Hornets tightened their arc and dropped to a working altitude. Miniguns chattered in short, disciplined bursts, scribbling bright lines that stitched across sandbag nests on the freighter's port side. An RPG man went to shoulder. A streak of rounds met him halfway and turned the tube into teeth. Silence isn't quiet in a rescue. It's the gap where the next move fits. 10 Seahawks rose out of the spray like black insects, rotors shaving the air, sliding into a hover where the ship's mast wouldn't shred them. Ropes dropped in a staccato blur. Seals and raiders flowed down like a zipper closing. Boots hit steel in 2 tight stacks, one pushing toward the bridge, one toward engineering and the cargo deck. Breach, breach, breach! A charge thumped. The bridge door flexed and toppled. 2 pirates turned too slowly. 2 controlled bursts ended the debate. A third went to ground and found a knee on his wrist and a zip tie on his future. Below, a fire team cut through a ladder well, flashbang first, white light, total sound, and then 2 suppressed shots into a firing port. The engine room's chaos, heat, oil, alarms, turned the fight into a strobe, but the team had rehearsed this geometry 100 times on a plywood mock-up. They cleared spaces in a cloverleaf, calling clear in voices that never rose. On the main deck, hostages were located fast, bound wrists, bruised faces, pupils wide with cortisol. Medics slid in, pushed tourniquets, sealed chest wounds, and clipped pulse ox sensors that blinked to a rhythm they could work with. One sailor with a deep laceration murmured the way men do when they aren't sure they're allowed to stop. A corpsman said his name until he looked up. "You're good. Stay with me." 8 minutes. From first rope to last zip tie, the boarding teams had the ship. Every pirate aboard was dead or detained. Every surviving American was alive. It would have been enough for a message. It wasn't enough for a cure. The fortress that thought it was safe. Drone feeds braided the next target together. A coastal compound 7 nautical miles inland, scraped into the sand like a glyph. Vehicle sheds, fuel bladders, a makeshift radar mast, cinder block buildings with steel doors, and entrances punched into a slope where tunnels ran down into darkness. For almost a decade, it had been the pirates' bank, bazaar, armory, and courtroom. It wasn't a den, it was a system. On the flag bridge, Sloan didn't blink. Switch targets, bring it down. 4 Super Hornets swept inland, wings heavy and steady. JDAMs rode their rails like promises. The command building vanished on the first pass, its roof folding like a paper box. Antennae nodded and dropped into their own dust. The second pair put steel on the fuel farm. The fireball climbed like a mushroom and rolled into a low wind, sucking sand into a spiral. MQ-9 Reapers slid into the gap and got surgical. Hellfire against bunker mouths. Hellfire against a stairwell cleverly cut under a corrugated lean-to. One missile drilled a cache of old mortar rounds. The sympathetic detonations ran around the compound like a zipper popping open. Then the Marines came in, because fights have to end on the ground. 2 CH-53s punched dust off the scrub. Raiders poured out and fanned across a smoking perimeter, moving with the patience of men who expect traps. Infrared goggles saw heat where walls met earth. Drone cursors put tiny green boxes on screens, and then the boxes simply weren't there anymore. Pockets of resistance sprayed blind fire from culverts. It stopped. Voices on radios tried to rally and ran out of sentences. Some men laid down their weapons and shivered in adrenaline's long shadow. Others ran into tunnels that didn't lead anywhere you'd want to go. By the time the smoke leaned sideways in the afternoon wind, the compound was rebar, crater lips, and heat shimmer. 500 fighters neutralized, dozens too wounded to run, trussed and staged for intelligence flights. No friendly casualties in the final assault. No hostages harmed. A stronghold that thought it was a rumor now wasn't anything at all. Securing the prize. Back at sea, the freighter's deck looked like a hospital aisle after a hurricane. Corpsmen stabilized the wounded under a tarp canopy. A K-9 team nosed through cargo corridors to confirm no one had tucked a surprise into a crate. EOD techs in stripped-down rigs checked the sensitive magazine, the compartment that had made this ship more than a ship. Then green-tagged it. The captain, hands still numb from zip ties, signed the custody sheet with a shake that stopped halfway through the A of his name. On the bridge, a SEAL radio operator popped a handset to his ear. "Thunder, prize is secure. Crew accounted for. Package is green." Below decks, a sailor glanced at a ragged edge of paper, the corner of a photo taped beside a bunk, now scorched. He smoothed it with his thumb and slid it into a pocket. The little things, after a big thing, are how people get through. A tug detail from the carrier group made up lines. The freighter swung into a slower heading, escorted by teeth no one could miss. The ocean went back to pretending to be calm. The ROE. Everyone felt. There's choreography you don't see in a video cut. Legal and moral guardrails that get built into the plan hours before the first blade turns. No strike rings bloomed on the digital map around fishing villages and market squares. The AI on the stingrays was smart enough to cue but not decide. Every weapon released had a human finger on it and a JAG who could look that decision in the eye. Collateral estimates weren't an afterthought. They were a gate. Rules of engagement don't win the firefight for you. They make sure the firefight you win is the right one. What it proved, and to whom. News moved fast because satellites don't sleep. Before the deck cooled on the carrier, Allied statements landed. Japan, Australia, the Philippines, calling the hijack reckless and the American action precise and justified. Maritime insurance rates in the region blipped for half a day, then fell back. Commerce likes a world where arteries stay open. Inside the Pentagon, the debrief was sharp and unsentimental. Operationally, a high-value logistics node was retaken with zero loss of life among surviving crew. A black market fortress that funded and armed repeat attacks ceased to exist. The entire cycle, distress burst to compound collapse, ran on a police raid timeline, not a maritime campaign timeline. Strategically, pirates and their bankers learned the math again. Touching an American lifeline buys you the whole stack. ISR, air dominance, special operators, precision strike, folded together under one brain and delivered before breakfast. Allies saw a quiet promise kept. Supply lines are defended like capital ships. Adversaries saw a rule set that doesn't care about your gray zone vocabulary. You don't get to hide behind privateers and local autonomy while cashing the checks. Technically, drones didn't replace pilots, they multiplied them. Boarding teams didn't improvise. They ran a script only experience can write. The old truth stayed true. Logistics is power. The tail wags the teeth. The human cost and the human curve. On the carrier, the fallen were met with ceremony you don't see on camera. Names called once, twice, 3 times. A bell, flags folded like origami and pressed into hands that never asked for this, but now know things no one should have to. In a debrief room lit too bright, a young sailor tried to explain how he'd aimed while shaking. A chief said, the thing chiefs say when a kid thinks he failed because fear made his hands buzz. You did it afraid. That's called courage. Far away, in a city with glass towers and expensive coffee, the men who bankroll coastal chaos watched muted footage. They are good at math. The return on investment had just gone negative. The aftershock on shore. The cratered compound wasn't just a pile of bricks, it was a ledger. Hard drives were pulled from ash, dried in rice and labs, imaged, decrypted. Phones with cracked screens lit up on forensic benches, names connected to money. Task forces that had been staring at corkboards with too much string finally cut some. A dozen untouchables found their bank accounts a little colder and their passports less useful. The ocean is vast, but the financial system is a pond if you know how to stir it. Meanwhile, smaller pirate crews did what small animals do when the Alpha gets taken by a lightning strike. They scattered. A few tried again, because hunger is louder than memory. Most took one look at the smudge on the horizon where a compound used to be, and chose fishing nets over RPGs, at least for a season. The last miles. By afternoon, the freighter rode heavier, like a man after surgery, stitched, stable, watched. A Seahawk hung off the port quarter like a shepherd dog. The captain stood at the wing and felt the wind on his split lip, and tried not to think about the coffee cup on the deck and the second before a sledge turned his door to splinters. A SEAL came up and leaned on the rail, both of them looking forward because sometimes two men can only talk if they're not talking. "You hit that distress switch pretty quick," the SEAL said. "Muscle memory," the captain said, "and luck." "Luck favors the trained," the SEAL said, and didn't smile because some lines are just true. Ahead, the carrier rose from the haze like a city. Tugs and tenders bent the world into smaller circles. The freighter's wake braided into the carrier's bigger wake, and for a minute, the ocean felt like a highway you could trust. Why this story matters? Because it's easy to think power is the big ship with the loud horn and the pretty jets. But power is also the rust-streaked freighter that smells like diesel and salt and keeps the jets honest. A navy that can't protect its logistics is a navy that can't look you in the eye and say, "We'll be there," and have you believe it. Because asymmetric warfare isn't clever if it doesn't work. 31 skiffs and 250 guns are blunt instruments when the other side brings a network. The US response wasn't magic, it was integration. Drones that see, fighters that blind, helicopters that deliver, operators that finish. Law wrapped around all of it like a spine, because deterrence isn't a speech, it's a memory you give your adversary. You want him to remember how fast it happened, how precise it felt, and how little room there was for a bargain. The last word. What began as a brutal swarm attack ended with a ship reclaimed, a fortress erased, and a doctrine underscored. The flag may fly from a humble freighter, but the carrier stands behind it. The ocean is vast, but if you target the United States on it, there are no corners dark enough to hide, and no morning long enough to save you. If this kept your pulse up, stay with us. Next time, we'll take you into the cockpit and the Combat Information Center, in real time, what gets said, what doesn't, and how decisions travel faster than bullets when the clock is measured in seconds.